They told us Charles Manson was a madman, a failed musician who turned a group of lost souls into killers, a cult leader who claimed he could start a race war through murder and fear. That's the story the world knows, the one that ended the dream of the 1960s. But what if that story isn't the whole truth? What if behind the chaos of the Manson murders lies something darker, something hidden in government files and forgotten by history? This is the Crime Archive. Subscribe and step into the shadows of the past, where nothing is ever as it seems. In August 1969, Los Angeles was gripped by terror. Actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, was found murdered along with 4 others in her Benedict Canyon home. The next night, supermarket executive Leno LaBianca and his wife Rosemary were slain in their house across town. The killers, members of a strange commune led by Charles Manson, a drifter who preached about an apocalyptic race war he called Helter Skelter, borrowing the term from a Beatles song. Manson, though not physically present at the Tate or LaBianca murders, was convicted of orchestrating them. The prosecution painted him as a manipulative guru who brainwashed his followers through drugs, sex, and fear. The media devoured the story. America saw him as the devil, a hippie-turned-murderer, proof that the counterculture had rotted from within. And with that, the 1960s, the era of peace and love, came to a bloody end. 3 decades later, journalist Tom O'Neill was assigned to write a simple anniversary piece about the Manson murders, a 500-word article about their cultural impact. It should have taken a month. Instead, it consumed the next 20 years of his life. In his groundbreaking book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, O'Neill uncovered disturbing questions, not just about Manson, but about how his story was built. Court records disappeared, witnesses changed their statements, parole reports were edited, and key figures in Manson's orbit seemed to have connections to government research projects and intelligence agencies. This was no longer just a crime story. It was a story about power, secrecy, and manipulation. The curious leniency of Charles Manson. Before the murders, Manson was already a criminal, a repeat offender with a long record of theft, fraud, and sexual assault. By the 1960s, he had spent most of his life in prison. Yet when he was released in 1967, something strange happened. Despite repeated parole violations, drug charges, stolen cars, underage girls, Manson was never returned to prison. His parole officers seemed unusually forgiving. O'Neill discovered that Manson's parole officer, Roger Smith, wasn't just any bureaucrat. Smith was deeply involved in drug research at UC Berkeley, funded by agencies linked to MKULTRA, the CIA's top-secret mind control program. Why would a parole officer connected to government drug experiments protect a violent ex-convict who was distributing LSD to vulnerable young people? No one could answer, but the pattern was undeniable. MKULTRA and the science of control. To understand O'Neill's theory, you have to understand MKULTRA. It was a clandestine CIA program active from the early 1950s through the 1970s, designed to study mind control, hypnosis, and psychological manipulation. The agency experimented on thousands of people, often without their consent, using LSD, electroshock therapy, and sensory deprivation. At the center of these experiments was Dr. Louis Jolly West, a psychiatrist who worked on both military and intelligence research. West studied how to break the human mind, how to erase identity and rebuild it through suggestion and trauma. And as O'Neill discovered, Dr. West's research overlapped with the world Manson lived in. He ran a violence prevention center in Los Angeles, not far from where Manson and his followers operated. He studied hippies, drug users, and the effects of LSD on social behavior. Could it be coincidence? Or was Manson, knowingly or not, part of a larger uncontrolled social experiment? The Manson family and the counterculture experiment. The late 1960s were a laboratory of revolution. Young people were rejecting authority experimenting with drugs, and questioning every institution that once defined America. It was a perfect environment for psychological experimentation. Manson's followers, mostly young women from stable, middle-class families, were transformed into killers through a blend of drugs, isolation, and emotional control. This pattern mirrored techniques used in behavioral conditioning and psychological warfare, precisely what MKULTRA was studying. O'Neill found hints that several figures around the family had connections to intelligence work or experimental psychiatry. The overlap was too consistent to ignore, but too incomplete to prove. The Manson murders didn't just kill people. They killed a cultural movement. The dream of peace, love, and rebellion was replaced with fear, paranoia, and mistrust. Suddenly, every hippie was a potential threat, every commune a cult, and the government, once the enemy of the counterculture, became its savior. The media's frenzy over Manson reshaped public opinion. Just as the Vietnam protests, the Black Panther movement, and anti-establishment voices were reaching their peak. In one summer, the summer of love turned into the season of fear. It's hard not to wonder, was Manson simply a madman who destroyed a movement? Or was he the perfect scapegoat for a system that wanted that movement destroyed? After 2 decades of research, Tom O'Neill admits he found no smoking gun. No direct proof that Manson was a government asset or a CIA subject, but he found questions that remain unanswered. Why were key documents sealed or destroyed? Why were Manson's associates protected despite repeated offenses? And why did the same psychiatrists who studied mind control appear again and again in his orbit? O'Neill's conclusion was humble but haunting. If Manson wasn't part of something bigger, then a lot of people went to a lot of trouble to make it look that way. Half a century later, the Manson murders remain a wound in American history. They mark the death of the 1960s dream and the birth of a darker America. Whether or not Charles Manson was a product of CIA experimentation, his story reveals a timeless truth, that power, when hidden behind ideology, can twist reality itself. Maybe Manson was a monster, or maybe he was a mirror, reflecting the madness of an age where freedom and control collided in the same Californian sun. Every crime tells 2 stories, the one we're given and the one we're not supposed to find. Tom O'Neill spent 20 years chasing the second one, and he still doesn't have all the answers. But maybe that's the point, because sometimes the real crime is what gets buried. This was the Crime Archive, where history's darkest secrets are never fully closed. Subscribe for more stories that challenge what you think you know.